Hi, everyone. So excited to be here, especially when I'm surrounded by my favorite bookends, Dave Snell, Jason Jurado. And we're going to be talking about motivation today. Chat's wide open. We really depend on chat and appreciate any insights or comments you may bring to the table so we can be more relevant. Hopefully, provide you some great takeaways. So, with that said, let me turn it over to Dave. Dave will give us a quick update, initial thoughts on motivation, and we'll get this party going.
Hey, it's good to see everybody. Don, Jason, always a pleasure to be here, as you know. Um, Not just platitudes. I think we've developed some good, strong relationships here, though we've never met. We get to see each other every other week and share thoughts. Nothing really new going on here. Like I was talking to Don, my daughter's going on a trip, so I'll have lots of free time for a week to do my own thing and you know, get back to the roots here of what has driven me over the last 4 or 5 years, and motivation is a key part of that. Because sometimes we have motivation and lags, and discipline comes back to what is that meaning and purpose that we have in our life to drive us, to keep us motivated. And that admittedly has been lagging in my own life here the last couple of weeks. And I've gotten a new coach, so hopefully he can kick me in the butt and get me physically back to where I need to be for my marathon in October, the end of October. So
Well, that's great. And, again, motivation is so important, we take for granted. So, Jason, what's your catch up and first thoughts on motivation?
Good morning, everyone, and as always, thank you. It's great to join both of you. Um, so my wife and I had an event this last weekend. It was on mala beads, and part of her tradition for meditation, but it's kind of, I have that mindfulness background as well, so it was great. We had an event. We had 12 people show up, which was right at what was good. It was a lot of work. So I mentioned that because that's what motivates me. So it was about collaboration with my wife, which is pretty exciting because she's given up a lot for me to be able to do what I'm doing. And so for her to join me and to spread her wings for what she loves too, and then to be in community, that's motivating for me. And to be in front of a crowd, be in front of people talking and teaching is pretty exciting too. So we find those things, we find the things that drive us, and the reason why I love this word is because right now, for some reason, and we see cycles in the industry or whatever we want to call it, the community that I'm in, people are talking about, well, don't worry about motivation. Find this or find that or because motivation can wane and everything can come and go. Everything's inside of us. So I'm really looking forward to exploring that today with both of you.
Yeah, that's great. And, as I think of motivation, it's really a discipline. Some people just, wake up and they feel great and that's their motivation. Other people wake up and don't feel great and that's maybe their lack of motivation. But it's what can you do to ensure a motivated mindset that will carry you through? Because there's so many parts of the day where you say, should I do something? And then you make a decision, okay, I'll do it, or okay, I won't. And sometimes you'll pass up on things that you should be doing. Because, what I found, and I actually read a book, it was like the 5 second book, I guess you might call it. And it says as soon as something comes into your mind to do, you have about 5 seconds to take action.
Interesting.
So, if you're walking out the door and you see a paper cup on the floor, and you say, I should pick it up, and then you say, well, I'm in a hurry, I'll get it later. Well, that's one more thing you have to do and one less thing you've done. And
Right.
I think humans have a need to feel like they're achieving something, right? And if you can say, hey, I needed to get a haircut, got a haircut, needed to put something in the mail, did that. As you're doing things, you're accomplishing things, you're proud of yourself. As you skip things, well, tomorrow it'll be fine, tomorrow it'll be fine. But, tomorrow never really comes. It's always the next day. And every good or bad habit continues the momentum or the trend towards that new habit, or creating a positive habit. And what turns you on, in a sense, motivates you, right? If you're looking forward to a great lunch and you prepare it and you enjoy it and you take account of it, and I guess part of the motivation is connecting the dots to find some level of satisfaction or happiness, right? If you're motivated to do something and it turns out to be rewarding, well, that's going to climb on your list. And, it's just knowing one step at a time. Too many people get set back by something and it takes them a while to get back. Sometimes they never do. And other people drive themselves to greater levels of accomplishment because they make a list. Sometimes they make a list the night before or the day before. I remember leaving my office and I'd have 6 things ready to go for tomorrow.
Yeah.
And they were new things. One thing I always prided myself on is having a clean desk. When I left, I was done for whatever I was done for. I was ready for the next day. But, why not make a decision? And I think that's really a part of it, is decision making, is I could do things, but I'm not, and it's because I don't have to. And then you put yourself in a position why do you have to do something? Why is it forced? And also you're the model for the people around you. Clean desks usually kind of model other clean desks. So anyways, Dave, there's a lot here.
That's
And I guess now it's time to start pulling it apart and seeing what's underneath.
Yeah, let's start unpacking this, because it's a very deep topic that I think a lot of people have lots of opinions on, and really for me, this comes down to, I really appreciate your 5-second rule there. It takes 5 seconds if you're going to do something. And as you were talking, it comes back to me as Admiral McCraven, former commander of JSOC and SOCOM. Make your bed in the morning. If you do one thing, if you make your bed in the morning, you've at least accomplished one thing in your day. And he teaches over time that these things build on each other. If you accomplish one thing, you'll accomplish 2 things. If you accomplish 2 things, you can accomplish 3 things. And just that momentum gets built. That the key word I wrote down as you were talking is habit. Make it a habit. And excellence is not a natural thing. We have to work at it. It takes an effort. Building habits to perform and practice and this is a word that my daughter just hates every time. She's like, well, I want to be able to do this. I said, well, that takes practice. Habits take practice, and you've got to do these things. And I really appreciate your clean desk comment, because I made a look, as you can see, I'm looking at my desk. It's not very clean right now. And these are, sometimes it's the demonstration of a scattered mind. I currently am going in 100 different directions, but at the same time, I try to come back and pocket these things to neaten it up so I can say, okay, these are my tasks for the next day, so I can be motivated, I can be disciplined to attack the problems. When I first came in the Navy, way before, we had PDAs for a little while in the early 2000s they gave us, but I had my old skipper taught me is have a 3x5 card, write down 5 things that have to be accomplished through the day and just attack them. Just do them. And you have that list with you. Instead of trying to remember it, it's something you can visualize and then put a check mark and say, I've done something. Admiral McCraven's do make your bed in the morning, and it'll start to snowball, if you will. I forgot the word I'm looking for. Snowball will work. And at the same time, on the clean desk comment, I know I'm going a little all over because I am a little scattered this week. But, I remember watching my dad when I was growing up. He had things all neatly organized, and he could just, we had to draw out our poster boards, and he was just very organized and neat. And I made this comment to my son, gosh, it's been about 10 years ago. And I said, I really wish that technology hadn't taken us away from that, because I learned so much. But my son never saw me doing that because I do it on this computer here. There's no no tangible, I'm not going to bring up my computer or my phone, but there's no tangible piece of paper or equipment he can see how we can organize our lives and focus and build on things, because it's all on computers now. I keep a very clean desktop on my computer, but he doesn't see that. I've kind of gone all over the place, but
No, I think it covered a lot of ground, and I think it's important.
yeah, this is going to build, I think, as we go on, because it's taking these steps of what can we accomplish will drive to the motivation to keep us going, if that makes sense. We lost Jason.
Well, he's right back.
Oh.
Yeah, I think you make some quality points. The saying that always permeates my thought process is everything is either going to take you closer to your goal or further away, depending on what you do. When you take care of a task, you open up an opportunity for another task, right? So if you have 5 things you need to do and you don't do them, you're not coming up with the next 5. You're still sitting there looking at it. And before turning over to Jason, what I learned from Jim Rowan long time ago, and I got to know him conversationally about 30 some years ago. And he still is, well, he passed away, but he was a major speaker and motivational guy. And he would always get his clothes for the morning done the night before, right? Because why do you want to wake up and then look for your socks or match a shirt? That was one thing he could wake up and feel good about, that he was prepared, versus people are, sitting around watching TV, and then they got 5 minutes to get out of the house, and they're rushing through traffic, and their whole day is just based on their inability to get started earlier and make the decision. If you have things to do, why are you doing what you're doing? Why are you sitting around watching YouTube videos? Right? I mean, that should always be kind of last on your list. Again, if you're a high performance, where you think minutes make a difference, actions matter, things like that, you start to get in front of it. And in time, you pick up a competitive advantage over those who don't. So everything you're doing is maybe driving you towards your goal. Everything everybody else is doing, maybe not. But it's almost, to Dave's point, a habit.
Right.
And if you're kind of OCD or kind of habit oriented, you feel bad when you break the habit, So Jason, what are your new thoughts?
Yeah. So the one thing that's come up with both of you had said is, it's like, it's a good feeling. And, Dave was talking about the feelings from seeing somebody showing him how to do things differently and having that interaction. And that's the whole point about motivation, is that motivation is a feeling. So all these other techniques are cerebral. They're things, they're thoughts, they're processes, they're techniques that we have in place to ultimately get us to feel good. And what feels good is our values. And values are what's important to us. And so whatever that looks like to you, whether it's personal growth, professional growth, across the board, you figure out what's important to you. And is it having a few extra more minutes in the morning? Is it, having to be able to pass this on to somebody else? But throughout that, you can find that motivation inside, because once again, it's a feeling. And so what makes you feel good when you do these things? So the accomplishment is huge. John, I love, as Dave was saying too, that 5-second thing is true. It's like you took action, or making your bed in the morning, you took action. And sometimes that's what it is. Sometimes, we can't find that spark. You don't always not everybody wakes up, the Tony Robbins of the world. He doesn't wake up every single morning excited. Probably a lot of the mornings he does, but we all have off days. But what do you do in that moment? And that's what you're both talking about, those habits. So what are the steps that we can take that allow us to keep in that groove and to maintain our excitement for what we're doing and accomplishing? I think that's something to look at within yourself.
Yeah, that's extremely valuable. And what's interesting is once you start doing things for yourself, if you're a little bit more elevated, you start doing things for other people, even though you're not expected, right? Because, being married for 47 years, you tend to split things up a little, and it just happens like, hey, you load and I'll unload, or
Yeah.
right. I mean, and you could say I did my half, but I can also do their half, and it doesn't take me much longer.
Yeah.
And when you decide I just did all I want to do or need to do or should do, that's when you start putting walls up versus, hey, I had an extra 10 minutes, nothing to do. I decided to do your stuff. Well, first of all, you're going to get some gratitude and appreciation because it wasn't expected, it wasn't required. But again, you decided, how can I spend 10 minutes? And it models, because eventually, and that's maybe part of being successful at my marriage, is every yes will give you another yes down the road. And every no will give you another no. So someone says, can I go and do this? And you say, no, we can't afford it, or don't have time for it. It's like, oh, okay, I understand, but but they're not appreciating it. I understand what it is. I agree with you, but it would have been nice. And now you want to go play poker with your buddies. And it's like, hey, there's not a direct relationship, but hey, I don't think that's a smart idea. And pretty soon everybody's starting to whittle each other down.
Right.
And at a certain point, what I really learned, and that goes for all parts of life, is 98% of the stuff I really don't care about. I have an opinion of. If you ask me, I'll tell you, but it's tomato. Early on, again, in my marriage, when we first got married, it's all new. We were really young. And my wife would say, well, which dress do you like better on me? And I didn't know. I mean, I'm not a dress connoisseur. And I said, well, initially, I said, whatever you like, I like, no, I want your opinion. So I said, okay, take the red one. And it'd be, well, I really kind of like the green one. And I said, why don't you just tell me that, and I'll tell you the green one. Or don't ask me if you don't want to hear what I have to say. Either way is okay. And you find yourself getting into situations where you don't even belong, right? It's, and when I was always good at, hey, the house is yours, the kids are yours, whatever you decide, that's great. When I go to work, that's my responsibility. We don't need to get involved in things like that. And I think it's courtesy. But here's Carrie, don't want to pass up a joke. One shark said to the other shark that had some stingrays on his eyes, look at my cool Ray-Ban glasses. Let me see what Carrie says. I know it's too late now. If I had listened to my dad when I was young in the Navy, I wouldn't be in this mess right now. Well, you are where you are, and it doesn't mean that's where you have to stay. And I think that's the beauty of life. And what I learned, I saw that is a trap when they ask what looks good. Well, and sometimes you can always answer a question with a question.
Which one do you like?
Yeah, like why do you want to know?
Yeah.
Is it important or is it just casual? So I think it's not trying to be competitive, but by trying to be cooperative, being the better person, knowing it doesn't take much more to do the 70% of it versus the 30. Another thing about being forgiving to yourself, to your past, but to Tony Robbins, a video I saw, he said the true keys to happiness is focus on the future, not the past.
Mm-hmm.
Focus on things you can control, things and not things you can't control. Because the past is done. It's in the books. It isn't going to change. Your perspective and your feelings towards it may continue and may impact you. But, every time I looked at people who passed on, and maybe it was always easier to let them go when that happened, is I knew what they wanted me to do and who they wanted me to be. And the last thing they wanted me to do is slow down and start grieving about something that's not going to change, or start taking, the hard thing about, or one of the important things about adversity early on is you either overcome it or it overcomes you. And you have so many excuses if you want to use them. because my dad died because of this, because of that. I deserve extra something, or I shouldn't play the game. But at the same time, there's situations where because of that, it drives you and motivates you to say, I want to be better than this.
Right.
And I know people want me to be better. And maybe it's self-justifying, but sometimes all you need is what you need to get over the hump, and you can always kind of revisit if you want. So, Dave, I know you've, like everybody else, has gone through tremendous change and transition, had exposure to many different influences, and made a determination to go the up until the to the right type of trend.
Yeah.
What was your evolution in that manner?
Not to get too deep in this. I'll go down this path first. Was honestly, it was leaving my family and recognizing that I was missing an opportunity to watch my daughter grow. She was just going into middle school, and I had hit a mark where I was just overweight. I said, I hit a mark where I was too high in weight that I told myself I'd never get above. I'm losing touch with my daughter and my family. So I got my proverbial stuff together and said, okay, what do I need to do to self-correct, to take that trend from down to up, to the right instead of down to the right. And I got my weight under control. I got my mind under control, my mindset under control, not just my brain and the chemical issues with depression, anxiety, and that. And that just snowballed. Okay. I thought, I couldn't run anymore. I physically thought my back was a problem. My legs were heavy. Okay, well, I'll go out and run a mile, or I'll run as long as I can, 5 minutes, 2 minutes, whatever it is. And I'll just keep building. And by doing it little bit by little bit, I got further and further, faster and faster. And at the same time, I caveat that with, I had the internal force I just mentioned. I had an external support system of doctor, family, and friends, a triad, who I said, guys, I need help. And they provided mental health, moral support, physical support, and the training aspect is that third one in this particular case. And it taught me, it brings me back to Carrie's comment about if I had listened, I wouldn't be where I am now. And to your point, Don, about the future and anxiety, it's never too late to change. That's the beauty. You may not be able to say, okay, I always had this dream of being an astronaut, and in 50 years, I'm going to go do it. And yet we can change our path. Nothing is set in stone until that last breath is taken. So why not have the effort taken to make those changes? And that comes down to, we've talked about before, Don, is my movement mind, which really is about mindset and your brain, meditation and meaning. We've talked about with Jason, you and Don and I have talked about purpose or why. Yeah. And those things will drive our discipline to the motivation to get disciplined. It's a cycle. There's no one, you can't have one without the other almost. It primes a pump, if you will. And, my last point here is I would just say no disrespect to Tony Robbins. I have one of his books behind me. I love listening to him talk. I think the motivation or the meaning, the purpose, the why will allow you to forget the future. It gives you a starting point, but focus on what you can do right now. We cannot live in the future because it hasn't happened yet. We can't live in the past. It's beyond us. You and I can't control our thoughts right now, or we can control our thoughts and how we react and how we move forward right now. I can't change what's going to happen in the future based on my actions today. If that makes sense.
No, it makes perfect sense. Jason, I know your mind's always spinning. What's new?
It's a great point. Yeah, we talk about the past and the future, and that there's only now. And I was just listening to something about Hawaiian Huna shamans. They talk about how the future isn't set, because the decisions you make now, and this is going to be a controversial one, and I'm just kind of throw it out there and move on though. But he says that the future is not designed by the decisions you make right now. The future is designed by the decisions you make in the future. And so we're on this path, and there's always turns and whatever. I share with people about, so my company name is called One Path. And sometimes people are like, well, there's only one path. And it's like, no, the one path comes from our final destination, where we're all, Ram Dass said, we're all just walking each other home. And so what that home is, it looks different to all of us, but that's the one path. And if you look at a mountain, there's a lot of different trails that go to the top of the mountain, but the top of the mountain is always the top of the mountain. But the beauty is there's a lot of trails that get to the top of the mountain. And you're always, whether it's, if you've ever climbed a mountain, you know that you don't just go straight up. That's going to make for a very long day. You have twists and turns, and you go and you find what works best, and you get your footing, and that footing wasn't that strong. And so you move around. And so that's the journey of life though. That's that constant adjustment and moving forward. To the point that we've been talking about, the why, which is truly going to be at the heart of the motivation for us, is if you have that why, you're going to keep going up that mountain. And you're like, well, that trail, you don't go, well, that trail didn't work, I'm going to sit down here now and just stop. You go, oh, that trail didn't work, let's try this other trail, because you keep moving forward. And incremental. Is it one step? Is it two steps? And maybe you had it all planned out. Maybe you had it, Dave was talking about having that mapped out thing. Maybe you have something all mapped out and it's all ready, but you have to be willing to let that go too. You have to be willing to say, not get stuck on the process, but on the end result. That's what, for me, that's what my motivation is, because that's in my value system. That's very important, is to keep moving forward and to keep discovering and, flexible and open mindset, curious mindset. So that's very important for me. And that's what motivates me. So when I come up against something, I'm like, oh, well, there was a sarcastic saying, colloquial, I don't know, 10 whatever years ago. Well, that happened. People, when something crazy would show up, people would say, well, that happened. And that's the reality, well, that whatever it was, that happened, and we just move forward, and we go from there. So I think that's very important to motivation, is to just keep that end goal. And the end goal can be the trail, right? Could be the journey. I'm on my journey. I'm going to keep going. And so as we find the things that excite us, we find the things that motivate us to do more.
Exactly. You guys make some great points. And I think everybody has to incorporate the timing element to it, right? How much time are you giving yourself? Why do you have to rush? If you're climbing a mountain, is there somewhere you have to be right after that? Right? Because you hurry to get somewhere, and then there was no reason to hurry, because you're not going anywhere from there.
Right.
And sometimes you're already where you need to be. People are climbing a mountain they're already at the top of. I mean, how many people say, we got to go over here? As soon as I go over there, hey, now we got to move over there. It's like, why don't we just go directly to the ultimate destination? Right. Or why don't we enjoy where we're at and savor the moment? Because to achieve happiness, you have to recognize happiness. And if you find yourself in a happy place, in a happy group, you want to extend the time. You don't want to just cross it off your list, because what's the purpose? The other element is being kind to yourself. You're the judge, jury, and everything to any situations. And you decide, I'm going to punish myself for the next 6 months thinking about this. So what was 6 months and a day different than tomorrow? Can't you just commute the sentence? I mean, you have so much control over what you think about, how you take action towards what you think about, and why not set the bar to success? Why are you always coming up short? Why you always feel lacking in something when you're not really taking into account the things you take for granted, right? How many people wouldn't trade places with you? I'm always thankful at night. I tell my wife, we got a roof over our head and we got warm food on the table. That's quite to be proud of.
Yeah.
We're not talking about some luxury limousine, or we're not talking about some exotic trip. I mean, those are always nice, but why not be happy more often with what you're accustomed to than always feel like we're not enough, we need to have more? And especially when it's materialistic versus something that's more spiritual, more emotional, something that will serve you better. Buy something, and within time it becomes an entitlement. And then if you don't have that third car, you feel like you're missing something.
Right.
And it's really grounding yourself. And gratitude goes a long way towards getting motivated, being thankful.
Mm-hmm.
And when you have enough, and most people have more than enough, believe me, you decide, hey, why not enjoy what we have, and why not share what we have? Because there's some satisfaction in including others in your happiness. You ever have a birthday party by yourself? I don't know who's singing happy birthday to you, but the more the merrier in a lot of cases. So, and I do believe the ultimate answer to the world's problems are going to be solved peer to peer, community to community. It's not going to be through institutions or governments. They can't seem to get out of their own way, or they have different intentions or motivation, but you can make a difference in the world. And we talked about that in the past, by a smile, by a kind gesture, by just taking a moment to be in someone else's world. And the other thing that's really crystal clear is anytime you involve yourself in something bigger or more important to yourself, you don't worry about yourself so much, right? How many times in case of emergencies, people are doing the most superhuman things that they could have never planned or intended, but it happened. Let me go to a couple comments. Linda's here. Linda's just a wonderful lady, been with us from the beginning, I would say. Done so much for so many, grandmother, great-grandmother, community leader. Good morning, guys. Finally got my signal to stay in. I'm glad I made it to this talk. I have lived this path, and then a long one comes. Everyone has a journey. Some have turns and valleys, and mine had to start looking for alternative cause doctors had no hope or choice left, and had become a passion to learn and help touch other lives for more options, and a community to encourage each other, like Don in his mornings. Appreciate you, and hated my area, had issues with being a part of your morning. Happy to be part and learn and share to help and touch others' lives. And that's beautiful, Linda, because it justifies what we do. If all we did was what we do for each other, that would be enough to justify the time. But if it can help more people, trip something in them that says today's the day,
right?
And sometimes you actually motivate yourself because of other people. You got people depending on you. You got people who would be very, very disappointed and upset if something bad happened to you. So sometimes you might say, well, I don't deserve it, but they don't deserve what comes from my actions either. And I think that's why people who are alone usually are more challenged, because it's just them. And because of just being them, they feel kind of in the shadows. They feel minimized, and they don't feel like it's fun anymore. And I think someone has to build that fun back into it, even if it's simple little things. Get yourself a cupcake and indulge in something. It's harmless. You can afford a few calories and a few carbs if that's what it comes down to. And I think even, and I'm very careful with nutrition, but people sometimes they take the fun out of eating, right? Because how much fun can you have with one bean sprout and a lettuce leaf and something, and versus, hey, once in a while, why not have something that's indulgent? Dave, what's your new thoughts?
I say have the donut, just don't make it a habit.
Or focus on the hole and not the donut.
There you go. I'm just eating around so I can find the hole. I think this is all great. And I think, I wrote down, as you were talking there, reading Linda's comment, which I think is fantastic. Community is the key. And, Jason, I stole one of your lines from previous comments that we've made is, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go as a team. And it's that community involvement. It's that finding purpose amongst the team. And Jason and I, you and I found it in the military in our respective services of a common driving force of national pride, I guess, of nationalism, whatever it is, or a common focus of saving each other's lives and being there. But we can find that outside of the military, outside of a work environment as well, just amongst our family, our friends, strangers with a smile, as you always point out, Don, just being nice to somebody. I don't know what's going on in someone else's life. And I don't want to be that negative impact that says, I've had an external impact on someone's internal drive, and maybe I've changed their motivation or I've taken them off task. Their timeline is now extended because I was negative to them. If I can lift them up and maybe I get them to that timeline faster, that's more better, as some people like to say, but that's much better for the community as a whole than if I come in and just crap on somebody and say, wow, that's a stupid goal. That's silliness. I don't think you have what it takes. Well, I've just provided a negative external influence that takes them off task. So community, and one of the things I appreciate about coming on here and watching your shows, Don, is we're all coming up. We're learning from each other, and that can help somebody stay motivated and on track and on task. Give them that external validation that I'm on the right path. These are all things that we can do as a team and as a community to move forward and maintain our own motivation for success and help somebody else.
That's so important. Jason?
Sorry, my phone's ringing over here. Yeah, those are great points. And that reminded me about, so in NLP, we talk about meta model or meta programs and just their filters and how we see the world. And we talk about, are you internally motivated or externally motivated? And, or how do you have internal checks or external checks? There's a whole thing. I'm not going to get into the gist of it, but the reality is that, how do you find your motivation? Can you find your motivation inside, or do you look outside to find your motivation? Are you looking for, like sometimes we look at our parents when we're little ones and say, oh, was that good? Was that not good? And then we need that, whatever we feel. Well, you carry that into adulthood, and you find yourself looking for that external recognition. And there has to be a balance, though. You have to know that's inside. I'll say it to anybody that I have this conversation with, and I tell my wife that, I've had the biggest, baddest, meanest people on the planet in my face yelling at me, telling me I screwed up and whatever. And okay, you can't faze me. But if I know I did something wrong, I collapse. I'm not collapse, but that's harsh. But I'm like, oh my God, I'm really hard on myself. But I know it. But because I'm internal, I'm like 100% internal. I have a little bit of an external check. Like I'm like, oh, well, did you think that was okay? But that's what we see in motivation. Where is that coming from? What is telling you that what is happening or what you did is good? And that's something that we have to be aware of. And if you find that yourself looking too external, maybe you should look and say, well, how come I can't tell myself that I'm doing a good job? How come I can't find satisfaction internally before having to just expand myself out to everybody else and let them have their vote before my vote counts?
Yeah, that's quality insight there. And I think the point you make is not only how you judge yourself, but how you judge others.
Right.
And why not reserve judgment? Because who cares if you're right? It's only important that it works, right? You could tell somebody you're the dumbest person I ever met and sincerely believe it. But what is that going to bring to the table for that person? Right? Just validate you're dumb, and I think you're dumb, and probably more people like me think you're dumb, and just, put somebody back. versus finding the good in people.
Yeah.
You know, you're the one who's got the Geiger counter, right? You're determining what you're searching for. So why not say, hey, you do a great job of decorating a cake. I've never had, you know, or you really put together something great here. Or you've got potential. I mean, in other words, if you can't talk about something specific, talk about possibilities, capabilities, you know, and, you know, at the same time, by not judging, you find that probably you could have been wrong. And how do you unring a bell? What do you tell somebody later on? You know, I made a terrible mistake. Well, I listened to your terrible mistake and it created even a bigger mistake for me. And, you know, you're dealing with other people's feelings, other people's lives. You don't always know what's going on, where they just came from, what they're experiencing. So giving people the benefit of the doubt and being the better person, and maybe being the person that does make a difference by just listening and not directing. Nobody, everybody knows what they should do pretty much. If you're heavy, you know that if you could snap your fingers and lose 30 pounds, you do it in a second, right? It's the difference between now doing what you really have to do and not snapping your fingers, and giving yourself some grace. And some people are just better off accepting certain things and not fighting, going against the flow. And maybe saying, hey, it isn't right at this time. I'll get back to it, or maybe I won't. But it's going to be me who makes that decision of when, how, and where I decide to take it. And at the end of the day, you're going to end up at the end of the day. You know, people say, if you only have one day to live, how would you live it? Well, you probably wouldn't be looking at your bank book, and you probably wouldn't be thinking about bills or something that's going to happen in the future that now will never happen again. You'd probably spend most of your time with the people you cared about most, either saying goodbye to them or giving them some reason to understand how much you appreciate them. But why not live every day as if it's your last? Because one day it will be. And, you know, I've come to the practice where I say goodbye to people believing I may never see this person again, right? It might sound a little depressing, but when you do see them the next time, you're overjoyed because, hey, we got another ride on the roller coaster of life together. And what you do models for other people, because you say, if he can tolerate that and suck that down, well, what's my challenge? And it's really asking people to think about things that they're not really taking full advantage of. You know, don't be so harsh on yourself. Linda comes back. Carrie says, so many great words for thoughts for us all. Have fantastic days, guys. Well, thank you, Linda. You know, you're always a presence here, even when you're not, because a lot of what we talk about stays with the show, stays with the consciousness of the show, and helps me and Jason and Dave direct our thoughts, because no man is an island. And, you know, unless you've got some influence and quality influence, and, you know, I think the other big thing about staying motivated is having something really exciting to look forward to, whether it ever shows up. You know, even the person who buys a $1 lottery ticket, at least until the drawing, feels maybe they could be the next billionaire.
Right.
I think there's not that many winners, but, you know, if that's all it takes, take it. You know, if someone offers you half a loaf, take the half a loaf, waiting for the full loaf, versus being too proud and saying, hey, if I can't get what I want, I don't want anything. Well, who's cutting their nose to spite their face at that point? You know, who's fooling who? And who really cares? You know, if someone says it's not good enough and someone says it is for me, you know, there was one joke that said there were two venture capitalists, and they were doing really well. And they went up in the mountains to look for some land, and they were going to build a house up there. And anyways, they were a little tired out. They sat down and had their shoes off, and all of a sudden they see a mountain lion. And one says, oh, geez, there's a mountain lion. And the other guy's putting his shoes on. He says, you know, we'll never outrace them. And the guy says, well, I can outrace you though. And I think that's where the punchline is, it's not you against the world. And there's so many people like you, but you don't know that until you expose yourself to it. There's so many more circles you're not aware of or not involved in that would probably invite you in. So Dave, we're talking about motivation, but it really seems like self-motivation is important and group motivation is important.
Yeah, the last point, let me just say, I want to go back to internal motivation in just a second, but your last point there is really, really critical, I think, societally right now. We're seeing a lot of people get out of the group dynamic, and I'm talking about the youth. I'm talking 12 to 25-ish, 30-ish even in some areas, where we've lost a group dynamic, where people are very self-absorbed. They're not engaging outside of themselves, outside of their own rooms, their dorm rooms, their bedrooms, their living rooms. They're not getting outside, whatever it is. And they are not having that interaction, so that they don't have that it decreases their motivation to do something, to seek lofty goals, because they're self-absorbed, usually in video games. And if it's not video games, I found it's a lot of social media. And the negative dopamine effects on, the dopamine effect is positive, but it's turned on them as an addiction. So they've lost touch with the external connection. But to go back to the internal, I've been thinking about this since you talked about it, Jason, is, there's a quote I've seen several times this week is, we live in our own brain. I'm going to bastardize it here a little bit, but we live in our own minds 24/7. Nobody's going to be driving our own thoughts other than us. So why not make them positive? And, Don, you asked earlier what made my downward slope turn back upward again 5 years ago. Was part of it was meditation, was recognizing that, look, meditation is not about blanking the mind. It's about focusing on one thing. And when a thought comes in that's away from this, allowing myself to come back naturally and nicely and positively to myself, allowing it to happen. And that happens with our thoughts all day long. I'm focused on a task. I see an email come in, I get distracted. I have to be nice to myself, positive with myself, saying, okay, that's nice, but I'm on task. And when I have that motivation to stay focused, that discipline, I should say, to stay focused, accept that something externally happened, but I need to get back to the internal and stay positive with it, I will go further faster.
I think that makes perfect sense, because it also shows you have an element of control. Yeah. And you have a filter that all of a sudden shows up when things are not smelling right, in Denmark, and it
takes practice. It's not a discipline. Sorry, that I know I do this every session. I interrupt you once.
No, I interrupt more than anybody, so I'm good at
that. Monks don't become nirvanic because after one or two sessions. It takes them lifetimes if they ever reach it, because they practice it. So we have to practice these positive mental aspects every day. And it can get boring and tedious and go, gosh, I'm not seeing the end result. And how often do we really see an end result when we're in the midst of a jungle? We don't know that we're on the right path till we get to the end. Same thing with everything we do in life. So give yourself some grace, give yourself some benefit of the doubt that you're on the right path. Rightly or wrongly, you don't know until you get to that one path, the end of the journey. You don't know. Just give yourself some slack, grace.
Well, I can characterize that, because I was a big NASCAR guy for a while, is give yourself a pit stop. Sometimes just laying down, closing your eyes for 5 minutes with no intention, but to I'm just going to relax for 5 or 10 minutes before my next whatever, or I'm going to stretch on the floor, do a couple exercises, and open myself up a little bit. And that's enough to say I'm better for it, right? You're making investments. I mean, if you had so many chips that you had to put around the table and make your bets, you want to make sure they're covered all the bases as much as possible. So whatever happens, you're going to get some win out of it. And the positive feeling and reinforcement drives it. Said, hey, took a 10-minute break the other day, made a big difference. Had a little more energy, a little bit more clarity. Sometimes people rush from one thing to another and they take what they just came from to the new person, right? Have a conversation with somebody and someone frustrated you, excited you. How do you change on a dime? The next person starts to see your face and says, where you been? What happened to you? You may not even be aware of it on how you're projecting, but it is showtime. When the lights go on, and how many comedians live tragic lives. But when it's showtime, the audience will never see that. They'll never know that because you're there for a purpose, entertaining or whatever. And if you achieve that, well, at least you got something going for yourself. So, Jason, before getting too far sidetracked, what's your new ideas?
So something that's come up that talks to both of the points that you're making is I was sharing with you. Hopefully I'm doing okay. My internet's a little funky.
You're doing good.
Okay. Shared with you, I was talking with a client right before we started today, and I had a session with him yesterday, and he didn't show up. He didn't go, and he reached out to me and he let me know that he just was too busy. He had too much going on with his work and he just got enveloped. Basically, a quick story is that he works in construction and he started his own company. And as he was building up his own clientele, he's working with the old company they worked with to take some side work just to kind of supplement it. Well, now with his company being busy and the other side work being busy, he's swamped. He has a ton of work. And so, he missed it and he was apologetic and stuff, but me, wanting to support him, I made sure I reached out to him and I said, well, this is a short-term sprint to get you where you want to go. I said, when you get a few moments, take a look and look at how is this work now going to help you achieve your long-term goal. Because I wanted him to stay motivated. I want him to not burn out and be like, oh man, I'm just working. And it's like, that's not the point. The point is you're doing this for a purpose and a reason. What is that purpose and reason? Kind of readdress that with yourself and be aware. And then so he can, reframe it and say, oh, well, yeah, I'm running right now because I'm going to make some money and I'm doing this, but I'm also getting my company out there and whatever. And the other point, to your point, Don, I told him, he has a wife and kids.
Little bit of a pause there.
To move on. So those are two very important things, I think, is to have a good mindset about see what you're doing is taking you where you want to go.
Well, I think to what Jason's really alluding to, here we go. Back again.
All right, so I'm not sure how much you heard or how much you didn't hear, but I think I'll leave it with this. See that what you're doing is taking you where you want to go, have a clear vision, and then take some time for yourself to also rest and recover so you're strong enough. Refill that pitcher so you can keep pouring those glasses out.
Yeah, no, definitely life is a marathon and not a sprint, and, there is no outcomes. There's only continuums. Right. So time doesn't run out on you until it actually really does. And then you don't have much to think or worry about at that point.
Right.
And some things aren't meant to be. Some things were meant to get you somewhere, just like you mentioned about climbing a mountain. At a certain point, you got to have a base camp. At a certain point, you move to the right or left, not up and down. And where are you comfortable? They always say it's the journey, not the destination that people appreciate. If you wanted to end a book, just read the last page. That'll get you there as fast as possible. But what did you miss between the beginning and the end?
Right.
And, where are your priorities? At a certain time, people mature in some ways and get immature in other ways. When is money enough? Most people, they spend their whole life worrying about money and they run out of time. When, Andrew Carnegie was a great example. He came to this country in steerage, worked at the lowest job in coal mining, and became the richest person in the world. And when they opened his desk after he passed away, he had a note that he made to himself when he came to this country. And it said, I'm going to spend the first half of my life making a fortune and the second half giving it away. And he created all the libraries around the country, Carnegie libraries, and he had purpose. And there's guys like Warren Buffett that are giving each kid $1 million, which should be enough to make sure that they stay out of the cold, but not enough to take their motivation away from them to do everything they could do, because you steal their thunder. My partner used to always regret, he had 4 kids and they were okay kids, but he said, I ruined them because I thought I was doing them a favor. I gave them everything they needed, everything they wanted, everything we could afford, but they became lazy. They became numb to motivation. They just felt like it was coming to them. And when it wasn't, then they were in deep trouble because they never learned how to swim on their own. And actually he felt bad. And that was one of his regrets, that he did his kids an injustice by not letting them earn their own way. And I was fortunate in having these mentors. And when my kids came along, I just made it clear nobody rides for free, and I wish it was. But I said, hey, I'm not going to be here forever. If I could be here forever and take care of you, I'd love to. But they paid for half of their education, even though I could have afforded it, because it's yours and you'll appreciate it. My daughter worked every day when she was away from college to make money for herself, and it set the tone for the future. So sometimes when you think you're doing somebody a favor, you're doing somebody a disservice. Sometimes when you're doing somebody a disservice, maybe it's a favor looking back. So coming up at the top of the hour, Dave, what's your formulation of motivation and where this conversation started and where it's
I think time always escapes us when we get into these things, and it's always a great feeling. I would just end with this: is find your purpose, find your why, your meaning, whatever it is that's going to drive you. Identify external and internal, motivational factors, things that will keep you going, whether it's family, friends, a support structure, or some internal drive that really is making you want to improve yourself. And then have a plan. Give yourself some grace, some compensation for, okay, I've gone fast, I need to slow down, have my pit stops. And the journey will take me to the end game. Whether I reach it or not, I'm going to enjoy that time as I keep focused on my goal.
Great point. Jason?
And the thing is, kindness. We talked about kindness and I'll say self-compassion during this whole process. If you're not finding motivation, if you're not excited for what you're doing, that's okay. You're all right. You don't go from stuck, no options, if you feel that way, to motivated. It doesn't make that change. But just find the one thing that'll help you get off of stuck, no options and move you in the forward direction. What's that one thing that can help you move you towards motivation, towards your why, towards what you want, figuring it out or going towards it, and take that one step and do it with compassion for yourself and say, hey, I'm trying. I'm making things happen. It's not going to show up overnight necessarily, but I am making effort towards where I want to go, and just love yourself and take those steps.
That's beautiful and very valuable. Just want to recognize Maria from Nigeria. Thank you for being here today. It looks like we've got worldwide influence. And the other thing I think in conclusion is have a schedule that is visible and easy to appreciate. Every day I have is blocked off. I know from 6:30 to 8, it's taking care of my exercise, getting out there, doing my walking. I can't wait to get out of bed and do it. Then after that, I plan a really nice breakfast, you know, and I look forward to mixing it up a little bit, putting different ingredients in the oatmeal or the Greek yogurt. I know I'm going to have lunch. I know I'm going to have dinner. I know I'm going to do another walk at the end of the day. And I know I'm going to do a show at 9 o'clock. And all of a sudden you got blocks that you can look forward to say, I'm going to make this the best show I can. And from here, I'm going to have the best lunch I can. And if it's visible, if it's attainable, then you start to find success in it. And it's the little things done right that compound over time. And if you're satisfied, I had a great breakfast. I'm going to have a great lunch. When you're done with that, you won. You won again. You won again. Most people rush through life and they don't even realize what they just ate, who they just were talking to. Slowing down is harder for most people than speeding up. Most people are always behind. Isn't it always great? And I had a mentor who told me, I leave an hour and a half earlier than everybody at the airport. I just make that a habit because I don't want to get stuck in traffic and start holding on to that steering wheel or start making comments when I could have got there, sat down, read a newspaper, done some work, got on the plane, was comfortable. Why put yourself in situations that you don't have to? And I think if people would just take account and measure, what makes for a successful day. And one last thing I'll say, which somehow I've been saying a lot lately. Somehow it came to me. I told my wife, I got to tell you something. I've never been happier my whole life than I am right now. And how many times can you actually say that and believe it? Because I got to still do this. I got to still do. Well, no, you're already good enough. You're already great enough, right? If you want to do a little bit better, go ahead. But don't feel you're running behind. Don't feel you're deficient. I think those are important. So last words, give yourself more credit. It'll motivate you based on the successes that you have. And maybe you can teach other people to be happy where they're at and get happier if they choose to be versus bad until I'm good, but I'm only good for a minute and then I'm back to bad and trying to make up for it. With that said, come back tomorrow. Jason will be here. Maybe Dave, maybe Kelly. And that's the beauty of life is, the mystery, the uncertainty. You don't want to know everything. You don't want to unwrap these surprise packages. Enjoy it for what it is. With that said, hope everybody has a beautiful day. Come back tomorrow if you can, and we'll do it